all day today. We are live. Good morning. It is Thursday, February 29th. Happy Leap Day. Woohoo! In Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. We're here with adult education and literacy. And the floor is yours. Sorry, we're a little late.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, I am Brian Kravitz, a resident of Waterbury, and I'm the Director of Outreach and Workforce Development at Central Vermont Adult Basic Education.
And I'm Karen Parker. I live in Sharon, Vermont. I serve as the Regional Director of Vermont Adult Learning in Windsor County, where I oversee 2 learning centers in Springfield and White River Junction.
Yes. All right. On behalf of Vermont's Adult Education and Literacy Network and our almost 2,000 students, I want to thank you for inviting us here today to testify about the work that we do, the findings of the High School Completion Committee report, and our request for legislative changes that will stabilize our funding for FY25 and onwards. We recognize that this year, many organizations are going to be approaching you for funding, and times are tight, and many will be asked to make cuts. As you can see on this slide, we do offer a full range of services. And our services are not Band-Aids or quick fixes. These are the assets that people need to change their lives. Statistically, 70% of those in social welfare programs have low literacy. 70% of those in prison have low literacy.
What's considered low literacy?
Low literacy is considered below a 5th grade level.
Okay. Wow.
70%. If a parent has low literacy, there's a 70% higher chance their children have low literacy. So there's a return on an investment for your support. As our students get skills, job certifications, and move into the workforce, they add to the economy. This can only happen through education, and for our students, it can only happen through our programs. The state fundings we're seeking through legislative changes is slightly less than 6.33 million than the 6.33 million we received in 2018. Adjusted for inflation, this is already a 22.8% cut, and we're working with it. In spite of this, we've slimmed our budgets, made staffing cuts, and we ask your support for the report recommendations to be discussed shortly, which will allow us to continue to provide the essential services that have a positive impact on the state's overall economy. On this slide is Wendy. Wendy came to us when she was in her 50s with no high school diploma. She had been a barn manager for a farm of over 1,000 head of cattle and was at her wit's end. Her body had fallen apart. She couldn't do it anymore. And I'm just going to read what her words, which are much more than I could ever say. With the help of my teachers at CBAE, I was able to fulfill my dream of having a high school diploma, as well as to get the resources to go into the Allied Health program at the Community College of Vermont. I worked full-time as an LNA while I earned my Allied Health certificate. Prior to discovering CBAE, I always avoided the topic of high school graduations because I hadn't actually graduated. My teacher at CBAE gave me the motivational calendar, which I kept for encouragement. They gave me the tools and I challenged myself. I really wanted a diploma and I made it happen. I didn't stop there. My diploma was a stepping stone to becoming an LNA, then an LPN, and now an RN. I'm proud to have become a registered nurse. So, supporting our work is not transactional, where the state provides funding and we simply spend it. It's relational. When we invest in the Adult Ed and Literacy Network, it adds opportunities for Vermonters, increases tax revenues, and decreases social welfare rolls, both of which are longitudinal.
Do you have those statistics, Brian, for us? Because I think that would be useful because your slides don't have those.
Yeah, I'll get them for you.
Yeah.
I'll get a full slate of statistics on literacy.
Yeah. And we did just pass an increase in the budget adjustment.
Our hope is that moving forward with the recommendations of the high school completion report is that we no longer have to come for budget adjustments at one time.
Yeah.
No, it would be great. Yeah.
I think, well, I'll just start by saying that I'm sure our small group today would agree. Anything we can do to help Vermonters get into the workforce, we're already here.
We
who don't need new housing is a huge priority for us. And we've talked to David about ELL and climate workforce and things that are, really helpful in creating new dynamic opportunities for people. So you don't have to sell us on that, it's just help us sell it to the rest of
Okay.
And
our colleagues.
and upskilling. I mean,
Yes,
taking people
yeah.
who are working, but
Right,
upskilling their
Right.
natural talents
yeah.
and it's just great. I think I love this program. I
Right.
just make more of it.
Well, that kind of connects to the CTE and workforce development work that we do. Many of the students that we work with are not quite ready for other educational or training opportunities. Sometimes even students that come to us with technically a high school credential are still showing that they're lacking skills that they would need in order to, you know, enter a training program or enter CCV, for example, or something like that. In addition to the academic services we provide, we closely work with students to craft personalized learning plans that connect them with social services to support their educational journey. Once they develop the skills that they need, we connect them with educational training opportunities to start them on a career path. So it's not just about earning a high school diploma through us.
Are you the
Or-
biggest provider of ELL?
Vermont Adult Learning is, I believe, yes. And so, you know, we do connect our students with CTE centers, with the tech centers across the state, with CCD, with the Vermont State College system. You know, we are kind of this on-ramp to CTE and kind of a first stop for some of Vermont's most vulnerable populations, to be able to enter the workforce.
And may I just pause there and ask you, how is your relationship with CTE working at the moment? Because I know both Hartford and
Mhm.
Springfield in our neck of the woods have adult CTE, but is it working well? Is there stuff we need to improve it? Because I have the feeling there may be, and that may be another conversation at another point and beyond what you want to talk about right now, but we need to work on that, I think.
Yeah, for sure. David, no, I think, you know, in my experience just in Windsor, we do have relationships with the tech centers. And so oftentimes if we have students, especially students who are coming from the high school directly, so they've disenrolled from the high school, but they're still interested in maybe following like the cosmetology program at the tech center or something like that, they can still enroll in the tech center through us and follow that path. And so, and graduate also with that credential that they've earned at the tech center. So I know like that's kind of how it operates. I think that those relationships could probably be built up, you know, with more funding and more staffing and more relationships between those entities. You know, we kind of create that on-ramp just gets bigger and bigger. That's just my experience in Windsor, though I don't know if it's different in other.
Well, we can chat.
Yeah.
And if I may, I think one of the problems is there's a disparity around the state. So for instance, in our service area, in Sabina, Washington, Orange, and Moyle County, our CTE centers are pretty slim in their adult offerings. You know, some Rutland, and I think isn't CVU up in Burlington, they have amazing programs. Ours are really, really slim. It's really hard you can't feed into what isn't there. We're trying to work out a program with, we're really trying to work a program with Central Vermont Career Center for LNA, and we're having a really hard time finding an instructor for it, to work with them. These are the issues. There just aren't a lot of programs. And I know there was just a study that came out about the governance and of adult CTE and CTE. So we'll see how that plays into it.
Senator Harrison?
Yeah, so a couple things. So on the LNAs, there are other organizations working on that. The state colleges have set up a few programs, so I don't know that there's good communication on
There's
going on and coordination.
There's a lot of programs, and we're
Yeah.
trying to. What we try to do is work with for our purpose at CBAE is to go in and kind of co-teach and say there's people in the program who don't have the skills to read, or you know, their reading skills, they don't have the memorization skills to remember the steps. That we would go in and concurrently, as they're learning the curriculum, we would work with them on those skills.
So that's great. And
Yeah.
then just something I learned last year was in our area, there was real need for ELL. And nobody was providing it. And even though this group didn't really have the funding, you found a way to do it.
Mm,
So just their responsiveness
Yeah.
was huge.
yeah,
It's going through the roof. In FY 22 at CBAE, we served 70 ELL students. Last year was 107. So there's a
Wow.
50% increase.
Yeah,
And potentially we're looking at in the 150 this year, maybe.
so
What's amazing is they're coming in at lower English levels than we've ever seen, like at
Mm.
brand new, like unable to say hello.
right, that's what I've seen too.
yeah.
But
those
but
kind of
they're
numbers,
also
yeah,
really well skilled and
Absolutely.
and they're literate in their
Yes.
language, which makes a big difference,
Right.
you know, when you're teaching.
yeah.
And I'm just wondering if we could even look for other sources of funding.
Mm-hmm.
Economic development funding, for example.
Right. If like saying to us, you gave us X million dollars and we are educating 150 ELL students, that it helps us show the value proposition of funding you all. So if you have that written down.
Okay.
The plus with ELL
Mhm.
students is so many of them are trained and certified in their own countries.
Exactly.
Right.
They come and we need to work bit more fully with OPR.
Yeah.
And English is the only barrier. I mean, they have the skill set, they have the
Right.
training, they have the experience.
Yeah.
And really language is the only barrier, and then we need to be able to figure out how to on-ramp them into our workforce so that we can get them as quickly as
Yeah.
possible.
I'm also curious about women's literacy specifically because they're less likely to be able to access education, but can become very, valuable workers. Everyone in Winooski will say, like, we want all of these women who never thought they'd have a job to be like our floor manager, because they're great at multitasking, but they never had a literacy opportunity.
And we're doing, in Brattleboro, there's a multicultural center that specifically has programs for women,
Mhm.
especially women who are not used to being with men who are not. in
Yes,
the family,
exactly,
And
exactly.
just helping
Yeah.
them assimilate.
A social
It's
justice.
it's a big investment,
Absolutely, yeah.
but they want to,
Yeah.
and it's happening quickly. It's
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are a number of the ELL who come in with low literacy in their own native countries. But
Yeah.
then there's the flip side of the people who come in and they do have advanced degrees.
Mhm.
However, they may not be able to enter the workforce here, and I think we've seen this for decades, right?
Yeah.
Because the laws here require 2 extra classes. It might be someone. Last year I was working with someone who had been a dentist in India for 10 years. Now in India as a dentist, as she said, they do everything. They do orthodontics, periodontics, everything.
Yep.
And she couldn't get her license here
Right.
because she had to take 2 classes that were required. And she said that she was going for these weekends at, University of Buffalo to see if she could get into the program where they would do these sort of.
Yeah.
And she had, one of her professors from India was in the same boat. He'd been a professor in India
Wow.
and he couldn't get
Wow.
the license here.
So then you need to tell us exactly what they need, and
Yeah.
so that we can,
Right.
or you can figure out how to do it, but just
Yeah.
be very specific
Yeah.
in your
Is
ask.
do you have a bill related to that or something?
Well, I have the bill that actually is getting heard today,
Yay.
on international medical school graduates.
Okay.
Which is a little different because they're doctors,
Mhm.
they're physicians.
Yeah,
And most of them learned in English.
Mhm,
Many
okay.
of the medical schools overseas are taught in English.
Yeah.
Some of the other
But the
jobs
folks,
underneath full
Yes.
position.
and that's
PR is
OPR.
very interested in this.
Right,
too.
but the physicians have a different board, they have a board of medical practice.
Okay.
Right.
We
But
might
it's
have
all-
emailed you here. Do you
So
want
it's
to?
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think about like, what was the old movie? I don't know, there was one, I think it was with Robin Williams or something, where wasn't he like a nuclear scientist from Russia and he came right here and had to wash dishes because
Oh.
they didn't recognize, it's been
Don't
going on
remember
for
that.
decades and decades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I'm gonna go back. Okay.
Okay, so we do want to talk a little bit about our workforce development programs. All 4 of our AEL and providers have workforce development programs. Vermont Adult Learning has Energy Works, weatherization, and heat pump installation, which you can see a slide on that behind me. We also have early childhood, customer service skills, paraprofessional training, and LNA training. Students come in, the stat is at just over 50% unemployed. Often those statistics change because of their entrance into workforce development programs or like CTE or some of the other kind of programs that we encourage them to follow once they've earned a credential through us. Speaking of ELL students, one of the things that we've been working on in Vermont Adult Learning down in Brattleboro is actually pre-teaching some of the vocabulary and some of the language skills that students need to understand these heat pump and weatherization trainings. And so to kind of have a cohort of ELL students that learn that language and vocabulary first before actually like being trained on the heat pump or doing the weatherization. And so that is a really exciting kind of new thing that we're exploring down in Brattleboro because there is such a large concentration of ELL students there.
Okay,
Mhm.
just that is wonderful. And something we were talking about yesterday in this committee, are EV chargers. And so we need installers of EV chargers
Well,
too.
they-
So just
need to be
all of
friendly.
the,
Things, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
But so, I mean, but there's an access to that, to becoming a trained electrician.
right, but it's
But
in the
that's a
same.
separate apprenticeship program. You have to get them ready to be.
Right, but they also don't have to be an electrician, but if they're, no, there has to be an electrician to install it.
Yeah.
But electricians have helpers too, so I'm
And
just saying,
apprentices.
yes, that since they're doing heat pumps, just.
So there's a lot of acronyms up here, but
Yes.
you are the largest energy training what is AEL?
adult education and literacy providers.
Oh, okay.
Vermont Adult Learning just covers more counties than like
Got it.
Peak Rural Center or CDAE.
Right, right.
or,
So I didn't know if this was specific to, like, are you the largest energy job trainer?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So I went to a program, I went to the wasn't the graduating class, but it was your partnership with Hartford.
Yes.
At AOT, we, in the big shed, we had a whole bunch of women who had been trained with, and I'm
Vermont
trying
Works
to
for Women.
remember the director's name, who does the energy work at Hartford for adult learning. Anyway, he's great, and we had this, sort of interdisciplinary with Vermont Works for Women and all of you, and they would all been trained in energy jobs,
Yeah.
which is very
That's
exciting.
great.
Yeah.
It's terrific.
We just one more stat for you is that's not on the screen is between January 1st, 2023 and December 31st, 2023. We had over 142 earned credentials through the AEL and DOL education and training administration projects. And that includes things like OSHA training, first aid, heat pump, early childhood, welding, things like that.
If you could get us those statistics, that would be really helpful, because that's what helps us sell you.
Right, yeah, for sure. I can
I
definitely.
mean,
get
that's
that to you.
pathetic, but it's true.
Yeah.
Well, it's a both and,
Yeah.
stories and data about our impact with our dollars.
Yeah.
It's gonna win the day.
And it's, we have to be able to measure our success.
And also, if we can help you, specifically the labor department, if there are things that you need from the labor department, this committee deals with that too.
Mhm.
And we are,
We deal with all workforce, so the whole 9 yards.
we're a WIOA Title II partner.
Yeah.
So that means that we're part of the American.
You're working closely with Jay Ramsey.
Yeah, we work with Department of Hireability and Department of Labor, that we're that American Job Center.
No.
We work with them, and for us, like, we have reciprocal forms where a student comes to us, if we identify they have a disability or a job need, we refer to the, those departments.
That's great.
All right.
Yes, we're almost at 9
Okay.
and Senator Brock, you're kind of glued to your seat once you sit down. He's just, Senator Cummings isn't well, so we're the forum today.
So you're okay,
Okay,
so.
yeah.
We'll miss you.
So,
Come
yeah.
back as soon as you can.
Yeah, should we get to your asks?
Yeah, okay, so let's just,
Yeah.
let's just hop along to the app.
Study reps.
The study reps? Did I just miss that?
Yeah.
If all right, so this just has to do with the high school completion study that Karen's gonna talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically there was a study committee, it consisted of a rep from our network, the AOE, Health Senate, Vermont Principal Association, and the Office of Racial Equity. Basically, the primary goals for the study were to find a stable funding mechanism that's scalable for the future, to minimize onerous paperwork created by the current system, and to remove the high stakes testing for the test of adult basic education that's currently being used as an entry and exit to high school completion funding. The AOE's goals were to clean up legislative language, decrease paperwork, and create a program that allows multiple ways to show proficiency. We believe the final report generally addresses all of these to mutual satisfaction. So the four kind of main points that the study committee came out with and that we support are sunsetting the high school completion program as it stands now and moving to a AEL funding into one grant program under the adult diploma program. Making the eligible age of student consistent across all sections of the legislation to the age of 16. That was just kind of the detail in the paperwork. There was some old legislation that didn't define an adult as a 16-year-old.
Which was higher.
Eliminating the test of adult basic education as a funding mechanism. That is actually a huge problem that we deal with every day. Students are not able to access funding because they don't score a certain number on any standardized test. And then honoring the funding mechanism in our governing statute that says adult education and literacy providers shall be paid, and this is in the governing statute, an amount equal to 26% of the base education amount for each student who completed the diagnostic portion of the program. That should result in an appropriation of about 6.3 million. And as Brian points out, that puts us funded at 2018 levels. But we're cool with that.
So-
Do all of these exist in a bill somewhere?
So,
Yeah, where does this add?
okay, so here's the ask. In the governor's budget for FY25,
Yeah,
it's a million less than the 6.3.
okay,
If you, there will be legislative language, that will be put forward.
okay.
And if that's approved, then that will add that.
For the,
That-
so it encompasses the policy recommendations, but also the $1 million.
It actually creates a whole new funding structure altogether. It
Okay.
gets rid of a lot of these. There's a
Okay.
block grant, there's fee for service, gets rid of all of that. It becomes,
One thing.
and one thing, it has to do with number of students based on of the average, that 26% of the average daily cost. So and then that gets scaled every year with inflation, and then as student numbers grow, then we get more money.
Are you at liberty to say where that's gonna emerge in our practice?
I can speak to that.
Can you identify yourself?
Yes, Meg Fost, Action Circles for the record. Mark Mahali has, Representative Mahali
Okay.
has that language drafted. And he is working on introducing it. It will likely either be introduced, inserted into the budget or the miscellaneous ed bill.
Okay,
Maybe still another vehicle, but the language is drafted, Ledge Council has done that.
okay,
And it's starting in the House and will make its way over. here.
okay, just keep in touch with us, which you've
Yes.
been great at doing about, where it comes up.
Yes.
So it's straight into approach. It's not starting in the House Ed Committee.
Right now, it's in appropriations, but working very closely with the House Education Committee, they've been involved along the way.
Right, and it's at 6.3.
I think the way it's gonna work is that the recommendation has to do with that cost and percentage, which means that it will automatically be that 6.3 based on the numbers. Next year, it would go up
With an inflator built
with
in.
an inflator and as student numbers go
As
up.
student
Yeah.
numbers go up, then we go up.
Do you have another recommendation? This that you,
Beyond this, one of the, just a minor point that we want to point out is, the AOE, desires for all the funding to come from the general fund. Because of statutory language where like ed funds can go, we don't really care where the money comes from.
Yeah.
Ed fund, general fund, combination of both. I know Mark Haley is working on, some legislative solutions to
Mhm.
what pot of money should we be paid out of. But, our stance on that is just, figure it out.
Your pocket is open.
Yes,
You're not-
exactly.
So we know
Puts it in.
there's been some kickback to, just for general funds. And
Mhm.
so Representative Mahaley is working with Senator Westman pretty closely on
Okay,
that language that's gonna satisfy a need and what percentage is gonna come from where. But again,
Okay.
our pockets are open.
well, and we have to channel our dear Senator Cummings, who's not here, that, the education fund is stretched quite a bit too, and
Right.
we're looking for resources.
So that's
Yeah.
what, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to make that, we're trying to make that case. that
It
we
makes
are-
sense,
We've already
Yeah.
taken the cuts. We're looking at,
right?
2018.
Right, I mean, my
2018
centers, I'll be honest, my centers have enough funding to be open 3 days a week and do virtual appointments the other 2 days. And we have waiting lists at both centers.
Yeah,
We have
Yeah.
students, we are having to, kind of elongate our intake
Right.
process.
right,
Trying to keep students engaged while we
Yeah.
wait for them to have an advisor and an instructor.
Yeah.
So we are stretched already with the
Mhm.
money that we have,
Mhm.
but we're making it work.
And I see the nexus to the education fund. I think we just need to think of funding sources when we pitch this, not just to keep putting pressure on it. Senator Brown.
Just a question, since unfortunately I was not here for the other part of the discussion, which you probably covered, regarding the testing requirement. Could you, in a 30-second, tell me what that is again?
Sure, so students right now, all students are required to take the test of adult basic education when they come to us. It's kind of a diagnostic placer test at the beginning,
To show where they are relative to what
Right.
what.
which is fine, but in order to graduate from high school, in order to actually have a high school diploma, they have to earn 5s on all 3 portions of that test, math, reading, and language. In order to enter the high school completion program and therefore access the funds connected to that program, they have to score 4s. I will tell you that we have a lot of students right now coming straight from the high school who are 2s and 3s. They are not at grade level, they are not working at a high school level. They
The
are,
question is the programs, does the program at the end bring them up to a level of a high school graduate?
yes, we do.
From a testing perspective.
From a testing perspective, yes, we do, because all of our students have to pass that test right now, in order to graduate. However, it's really an interesting conversation because Vermont claims to be, a state that doesn't have high stakes testing, proficiency-based state. And this is a high stakes test as it stands right now.
Yeah.
Our students are actually expected to do more than the average high school student in order to graduate from high school. And we have a very specific demographic that's being asked to do more than the typical high school graduate, which is, I think, an equity issue and actually a really big problem when you look at who our students are and what part of the population you're asking. You have to meet all of these local proficiencies or credits. You have to earn all of those. In addition to that, you have to pass this test.
Right. So we have to make a quick turnaround. We only have our next witness for 9 minutes now.
Okay.
But we appreciate this. We appreciate that it exists somewhere so we can look to support it and.
We'll get you all,
We're big fans of
Yeah.
adult.
we'll get you all the
education
data you've asked for.
And English
Yeah,
language
thank
learning
you.
in this.
Yeah, data's really cool.
And we provide great additions to our workforce, so
Okay.
we're so grateful.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very much. And Windsor, we need to do something together.
Yeah.
I would very much enjoy that.
Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be great.
Okay.
We have, I don't know what you're doing June 27th, but we have a graduation at Windsor High School.
I have no idea, but invite me.
Okay, I
Um,
will make sure
It
that
seems
you.
like-
so we are
Yeah.
switching gears to Act 58.
Thank you
This is
so
a
much.
bill that has not been voted on yet in Senate Judiciary.
Oh, we're doing a
One-
flyby.
Somewhat of a flyby, but it is, there's a significant piece of landlord tenant law in here. So, I appreciate the senators here this opportunity to discuss this before the vote. And I didn't think we needed senators here, so we'll just have John walk us through this as quickly as he needs to because he has to go. And then we'll have a longer discussion with Vermont Legal Aid. But we might take a pause after John, Allison, so you can get your pens since we need to get this to somebody soon.
Sure, and appreciate the flexibility. I did let the committee assistant for House General know that I may be running just a little bit late.
Thank
This
you.
is a pretty, all bills are significant, but there's some pretty meaningful things in here, so I do want to be clear. My section, so this is, this is a much bigger bill, but we're gonna just deal with the eviction pieces, so that's
Absolutely.
jumping to section 15.
Could you enlarge that a bit?
Yes, once I get down to my section.
So, okay, can you give us an overview of why we're seeing this bill?
I think John will.
I'm assuming that you guys would have an interest in the landlord tenant
Yeah.
pieces,
Yeah.
which is what all of my sections deal with. I will say, I do think of this as more of a judiciary concern because this is talking about the evictions process, like speeding up particular pieces, due process concerns. So it's appropriate in that committee, but given landlord tenant
Yeah.
overlap,
Yeah.
presumably something you guys.
And our task force that we're asking.
Exactly. And one of the particular call outs in that study is to evictions related to this particular behavior. So this is a bill that attempts to address some of that. The general point of this is there are multiple pieces of the bill, but these pieces that you're going to see today deal with tenants who are engaging in what is already a deemed category under our landlord tenant laws. That's this call out right here: criminal activity, illegal drug activity, or acts of violence, any of which threaten the health or safety of other residents. This is currently built into our, this is one of the permissible termination bases. You can also have termination for not paying rent, just for you guys' background. The termination is what starts the process. It is before an eviction proceeding is started. So that's what a landlord will issue to a tenant to tell them you need to be out by X date. There are different termination notice periods depending on the bases that you have. So certain might be 30 days, certain might be 14. This particular basis, criminal activity, illegal drug activity and the like, has one of the most accelerated bases in our landlord tenant laws. And what this bill does is it shortens that period, which was already 14 days, down to 7 days. So that means that a landlord can ask a tenant to leave within 7 days on the basis of an allegation that they're engaging in this particular kind of behavior. And then after that, and we'll get to it, tightens up or shortens some of the periods related to once an actual eviction proceeding has commenced.
Okay. Is there a separate section on a someone who has achieved tenancy but isn't a leaseholder, or a tenant here captures someone over 30 days or anybody?
So tenant is in the usual sense that it's used in our landlord tenant laws, because it's someone who has an agreement with the landlord in place. There is this section above that relates to folks who might be staying at the place but are not.
Or using the, but I mean,
Or
what we
using the
heard in
place.
testimony was the use, just basically moving in on somebody else's lease, using the space.
I think I'm sorry I know this is going to delay, but I think we're interested in that piece too, because
Yeah.
that's the piece that had been communicated to me from the start, that we were going to be focused on someone who doesn't have a tenancy claim and is potentially harming the tenant by their presence as well.
And the rest of the building.
Right. It could be both. I'm keeping open mind to the other section, but we're concerned. I think this section seemed to be the important one.
So this section was drafted by Michelle. I can still talk about it.
Yeah.
But this relates to folks who are not tenants. And I'll read through it just so you can see what happens here. So unlawful drug activity in a dwelling flash citation. So except for good cause shown, the person cited or arresting for dispensing or selling a regulated drug in violation of this chapter. Again, this would be outside of the scope of landlord tenant laws. This is in Title 18, which is health.
Yeah.
Shall be arraigned on the next business day. So immediately after the citation or arrest, if the alleged illegal activity occurred at a dwelling where the person is not a legal tenant. So that last clause is kind of the key line here, getting at the population that you're talking about. They're not one of the tenants on the lease. There's no oral or written agreement with the landlord. So immediate arraignment for them. And then unless the person is held without bail for another offense, the state's attorney shall request conditions of release for a person subject to that subsection, and may include as a condition of release that the person is prohibited from coming within a fixed distance of the dwelling. So what this is meant to do is say immediate arraignment if you're not that tenant and you're being arraigned on these bases, and then can include as a condition of release that you not be permitted to return to that property.
Right. And I hear you that this piece is on our jurisdiction, but what really concerns me is that how often does someone who's the tenant, who's hooked on drugs or, involved in this somehow, get lumped in as engaged in illegal activity because someone is living with them who is coercing them?
Oh, you mean how much could their behavior be used to essentially use the existing landlord tenant laws to get at a tenant who's not otherwise engaging in criminal activity?
No, I mean, this seemed to be the piece that I get, but it seems so likely that if you remove that person, you would then be able to see if the tenant is engaged in their own criminal activity. And if you if these are occurring simultaneously, the tenant is very likely gonna be charged just like the person who's in their house, potentially coercing this behavior.
I see what you're saying. Like there's a risk of using this because you may pull in the tenant as well.
Well, I'm less concerned about the risk of using this. I'm more concerned about then, the second part, our part, that you're evicting a tenant. Maybe at the, who's caught up in something that if you
That is
ejected
wholly
the other person,
Right.
might be taken care of. But I don't know how to put that in statute. I thought this was the piece
Right.
we were doing, and I didn't know we were doing the second piece.
No, that's, I mean, it is an interesting piece, and part of what's come up in some of the testimony that I've been able to sit in on is so much of this relates to what actual enforcement activity goes on. I think that's part of what the important piece
Yeah,
of this is, because if, some of the testimony that we've heard is that landlords aren't even necessarily using the pieces that I have drafted related to criminal activity evictions, that typically relying on other bases, and in part it may relate to the difficulty of proving those things. But it
Yeah.
could also be that to the extent that folks are engaging in criminal activity, illegal
Right.
activities, threatening the safety of others, there are other bases available to deal with that problem. That is not
right.
exclusively a landlord-tenant problem. So I
Right.
think that is a really important piece. And sort of my drafting is just restricted to what you can do within the realm of landlord-tenant, but I completely agree.
Right.
There's other avenues for dealing with the problem that don't rely in any way on evictions.
Right, okay, so, yeah, I don't wanna go past sort of your jurisdiction as the person who drafted this, but this one was the one that I felt like, okay, I get it, this is what people are really asking us to do, is
I
take
thought this
non-leaseable
Cathedral Square says.
I don't know if Cathedral Square, but
Well,
many,
they
the
testified.
Burlington Housing Authority, so many people we've talked to, Decker Towers, it's been someone else
Decker Towers,
who
right.
takes advantage of.
Right.
Yeah, I was like, if this is
Decker
happening in
Towers,
Cathedral Square, I'm very concerned.
Not
Yeah,
Cathedral
okay.
Square,
Yeah,
Decker Towers.
yes, Senator Brown.
I'm just looking at the first two paragraphs, and obviously there's more to it here, but it says if someone is arrested, and that's whether it's the tenant or a non-tenant, they need to be arraigned the next business day. That's one. If it occurs where the person is not a legal tenant, so that solely that applies to that person who is not a tenant. And then the next paragraph applies solely to that person who is not a tenant in terms of the building. Does it nothing to do with eviction of the tenant?
Right.
So the tenant presumably of that person's illegal drug activity, if it involves the tenant is arrested and cited, there are other provisions of this bill that deal with that.
With the tenant,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what we're.
yes, exactly.
That's
And I,
the piece that.
Yes,
and I think your
Yeah.
point on subsection A, obviously I've not really looked too much at this, just given that this is outside of my scope. I think that you're exactly right, that shall be arraigned on is not connected to, it's if the alleged illegal activity occurred at a dwelling where the person is not a legal tenant. So that's the condition that triggers it. It doesn't
Right.
say in that place.
yeah,
Um,
and
But it has nothing to do with action against the tenants.
right, for shorthand, this, in my view with Senator Sears, this has been called ejection, since it's not an eviction, it's
Mhm.
quickly ejected someone who is not,
And it's
lawfully.
to deal with a
Yeah.
problem that we've seen really throughout Vermont, in which someone who's a
Exactly.
drug dealer moves into somebody else's apartment, that person may be addicted or whatever.
Yeah.
And effectively takes it over.
Mhm.
They displace them and use it as a and we've seen Rutland has had it in Burlington big time.
So we should let John,
Yeah.
we do, I think we have other witnesses who will talk to us about the pros and cons of all of these pieces, but let's let John.
Yeah, so I'll try to jump quickly through my sections just because I am gonna have to run.
Yeah.
But just to give you the sense of what's happening, I did, and not to balloon this even further, but to the ejectment piece,
Yeah,
there is further statute in Title 12 that deals with unlawful occupants that's not addressed here. However, that is, and it's kind of an older section that allows for accelerated processes for getting folks out who aren't tenants.
Mhm.
However, it is tied to conditions in the lease prohibiting subleasing, so it seemed a little bit off the mark. But just something that if you're interested in, it may be a piece to look at.
I once introduced a bill that is how I met my husband eventually. That said, if you, by law, you have to tell your landlord if you're subleasing. And it never passed. He said it was a good bill in the paper 3 years before we met. But I'm just bringing that up because I think that is something we could reintroduce in lieu of one of these is that if you should require that they let you know who's living in there. Or anyhow.
And I think it's a fairly standard, yeah, so I am gonna try to fly through these,
Yeah.
but please, if you need more time, just tell me and I will let those folks know. So the first piece I kind of already highlighted here, there's a shortening of the termination notice period specifically for this set of activities, so that's 4467B2 termination, shortening from 14 days to 7 days. So when termination is based on that criminal activity, any which threatens the health or safety of other residents, the landlord can give notice and that person is required to leave within 7 days. After that point, that's when the eviction proceeding can commence.
This is all alleged activity. It
That's
isn't
correct.
proven.
That's
So
correct.
None of this is proven. It's all alleged.
That's correct. At the point that a landlord is issuing a termination notice, it's just a landlord identifying that that behavior is happening, giving the termination notice. There's no judicial proceeding at this point. The next piece here is just calling out that when we looked at Title 12, which we'll get to below, there's an expedited evictions process for this particular set of actions. So an action can commence and will be subject to this expedited eviction process, which we'll get to, which just shortens up two pieces of the pleadings is effectively what happens.
Sorry, I'm just reading it. I'm thinking possession like drugs, so enacting
No, it's-
for possession.
Yeah, and there's different ways to say this. You could say an eviction proceeding based on.
Okay,
I want it to be a bit tighter if possible, but if folks are
Okay.
confused by tenant for possession. And that is what the landlord is doing, is they're
Yeah.
trying to secure at the end of this process a writ of possession, which is what entitles them to gain.
right.
Possession of the apartment,
Exactly.
not of the drugs.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
Yeah, right.
That's right. So jumping
Right.
down, this is the mobile homes piece, because
Okay.
mobile home lots within mobile home parks are not governed by landlord tenant laws typically. So to the extent that a mobile home park owner is trying to evict someone from a mobile home lot, that will be, and they own that mobile home or they own the lot, they will abide under this Title 10 section. So this is meant to get at those folks who would otherwise be outside the purview of the Title 9 pieces, our standard landlord tenant laws. So this is to address,
Similar problem.
it's supposed to address the same problems just within mobile home parks. That's the idea.
They could go right.
Yep. And there are slightly different bases for eviction here. It's slightly narrower than what you see in the landlord tenant laws. Generally, you can see here that a leaseholder may be evicted only for non-payment of rent or for a substantial violation of the lease terms of the mobile home park. Or if there's a change in the use of the park or parks thereof. So there's slightly narrower scope for eviction bases and slightly different timelines involved in mobile home parks. But this has a similar effect to what we've talked about above. So here, this is talking about the notice that would happen prior to the commencement of an eviction proceeding. The park owner shall notify the leaseholder by certified or registered mail, such as provided below, which we'll see. This is just cleaning up some references here to align with what's already in statute, but adding that for an eviction based on that mobile home park residence, criminal activity, illegal drug activity, or acts of violence, any of which threaten the health or safety of other residents, that an eviction proceeding may be commenced 7 days following the date of the mailing of the notice. So that's meant to align with that 7-day period that we just talked about above for general landlord tenant laws.
Do we have to consider like it's one leaseholder out of 4?
Sorry, I'm not totally following.
Yeah, what do you?
If they evict, can they only evict one person if they are a shared leaseholder with other?
Oh, you're saying if two people happen to be on the same lease,
Yeah.
like, is there a check on?
I just feel like a bunch of people are gonna get caught up in this because it's all alleged.
I don't think that should, I guess I don't have a clear answer, so I don't want
Okay.
to overstate, but I don't think that should pick up another person on the lease who is not. But that's an
Okay,
important question, if there would be accidental consequences for folks not engaged in, yeah.
Well, or who have been affected and not engaged in the activity which has enabled the moving in of this, of the drug dealer, let's say, just
Right.
very
Four
simplistic,
people
so.
who are on the lease, are
Yeah.
they jointly responsible for any activity that occurs within the property?
Right.
Well, they're
And
responsible
so
for
if
any
only
damage
one of
that,
them, well,
yeah.
the question is, what's their responsibility? If one of them is engaged in legal activity, the other three aren't, but they're in the same property. Are you able to evict one person, from a lease, without evicting all of them?
Right.
Because are they jointly responsible? I guess that's my question.
This is something I would definitely want you more research on to get a good answer, because I don't wanna,
I mean, someone couldn't commit a sexual assault, you know, in their room and we wouldn't likely hold the three other tenants responsible for that, so I just don't know.
Well, Gene is coming up.
Right.
To a lawyer.
so the way that we are having this work is that you'll recall that the basis in the mobile home parks is that non-payment of rent or substantial violation. So what this section does is amends the statute to say that criminal activity, illegal drug activity is going to be deemed a substantial violation of the lease term. So it's pulled into that section above that triggers the eviction proceedings. There is an additional consequence of this that is unlike what happens in the general landlord tenant laws, which is that you can see here, under subdivision C, a substantial violation of the lease terms or an additional non-payment of rent occurring within 6 months of the giving of that notice that we just referenced above may result in immediate eviction proceedings. So together with what I just said about deeming this activity to be a substantial violation, technically what it means is that if someone was alleged to have engaged in this activity, they're issued a notice by the mobile home park owner, and then the next day, the mobile home park owner encounters another substantial violation of the lease terms, which would be that same criminal activity, if they're doing criminal activity, drug activity, whatever, that's threatening the health and safety of other residents, they could then proceed to immediate eviction proceedings. So this is something that is different, has a much tighter, this subdivision C in conjunction with that deeming piece creates a very accelerated possibility to commence those eviction proceedings. So that's
Okay.
worth noting.
Is this, so the big question in mobile home park law is this only for somebody who is leasing the land and leasing their mobile home?
Or owns
Or
a mobile
what if they
home.
own their mobile home and they're leasing the land?
If they own the mobile home, but they lease the land, they can still be evicted in this manner. So this is
This is why.
mobile home, this is when mobile home park owners are
Yes.
evicting residents of those parks. Now, if the home that there may be a complication if the mobile home resident is living in a home that is owned by someone other than the mobile home park owner. That could put them in
Right.
Title IX land, which would result
Well,
in different.
And complicated again, if they're in, if we've had this moving in of other actors and displaced owner.
Mhm.
And it seems to me this is a much bigger and more challenging thing, because what do you do if it's do they have to move that mobile home out of the
In a day.
park in a day? I mean, that's impossible.
So there's a whole separate
Yeah.
abandonment piece that is
Okay.
longer, but
Is this the last section?
yeah, so let me just, I am back for one.
Yeah.
I mean,
This is just, again, this is doing the same thing that we saw above, subject
Uh-huh.
to the expedited eviction process. This is the actual expedited process. What this says is it just shortens two pieces of the eviction proceedings to say that typically what a tenant will do when the eviction proceeding commences, they'll receive a complaint and they need to answer that typically within 21 days. This shortens that period to 10 days after service,
Mhm.
and additionally limits filing of counterclaims. So if they have separate claims against the landlord or the mobile home park owner, typically they would have 21 days to file any counterclaims. I don't know how often these happen in the landlord tenant space. It may be common, but this tightens up.
It's with security deposit that seems to track a little bit. So I just want to make sure, I have one more clarifying question, but we'll then have to let you go on the clarifying questions. So the part about ejecting a non-leaseholder, is that true for mobile home park law and landlord tenant law?
That piece applies irrespective of the
Okay, so
residential
that doesn't,
structure,
it didn't need a
the Title
separate.
18 thing.
So
Yeah,
then the mobile home park piece is the one where you have separate statute about the leaseholders.
that's right.
Okay.
This last piece, you may know that we already contemplate accelerated or more limited timeframes for the issuance of writs of possession. Typically, sorry, I just stated that. The writ of possession that goes out at the end, if the landlord wins the evictions proceeding. Even at that point, they do not immediately regain possession of the property. They still have to have the issuance of a writ of possession. And you can see here that writ directs the sheriff, in which the property is located, to serve the writ upon the defendant and not earlier than 14 days after the writ is served, put the plaintiff into possession. So even after a landlord has gone through the process, they've received the judgment, the writ of possession issues and is served, there's still 14 days after that. There's one more tightening up here or shortening of periods that happens. And that's for this particular activity, it shortens that 14-day period to 7 days. So as a whole, what this bill does, at least pieces that I have, is just cuts off time from a bunch of stages of the eviction proceeding, including just at that termination notice stage when it's just the landlord saying, hey, I need you to leave for this reason.
So, and it's all on alleged activity, still not proven.
The termination notice is entirely based on allegation.
Right.
The shortening of the process afforded has not been proven at the point that the landlord is commencing the eviction proceeding, obviously.
Does anyone else want to print out of this?
I'd love that section.
Sure.
It's actually a bunch of sections.
Yeah, just maybe print out the whole bill, because is there a definition built into the bill for criminal activity, drug activity, or acts of violence, or does it rely on another section of?
My concern also
Yeah.
goes to that point, which is you're doing this just for drugs, because that's what we heard, but actually there's a lot of this trafficking, there are a lot of other
Yeah.
things that could be equally worrisome for
Well, that's violence or
an
contagion.
active, yeah,
Well, that is contagion.
other criminal activity that is not
But
identified.
is there definition?
So I'll answer that and then I have to.
Yes, yeah.
There is no definition added to Title IX for this piece. However, this is an existing concept, a
Okay.
long-term existing concept in landlord tenant law. I can't speak to how judges treat this.
Yeah.
Maybe other folks will be able to give testimony on that. but
Right.
This is not a new concept.
Right, that's true with the longer eviction process. Okay.
And I'm sorry, but
No, thank you, John, for taking extra time.
There's a lot of big ideas in a very
Yeah.
compressed.
yeah, and
Speaking of compressed timeframes.
I certainly want to do
7 minutes
justice
down
to the
for-
material too, just because it is these are significant changes.
Right.
So if you need me back here, let me know.
Thank you.
We will, thanks.
And thanks, John. When I told Senator Sears that, when he asked, do you think you need me? And I said, no, not if you're too busy. I didn't know how much was in this bill. So, we will be talking more to
But we about here
Senator
with
Sears, but let's get Gene in the witness chair. I just want to say, people see Senator Sears on here and he's not present, and I thought that was more of a technicality, but I do think we need to hear his impassioned reasoning behind some of these things, because they cast a very broad net for tenant law.
Yeah, and. Oh, sorry, I just have to mark this. In Senate come-up yesterday, we had a whole discussion about just cause and another issue for our
Okay,
tenant,
okay, yeah,
task force,
Yeah.
because. Our users is reason not good.
Right.
That's right, embedded.
where are your pens?
I have to have a moment to go and get.
Wait, are they, so it's like a 2-minute moment?
It is a over to Senate come-up.
Okay. Oh, that would be great.
Yeah, they're in my drawer. In Senate come-up, so be forgiving when you open the door. Open the door, they're on the left.
This sounds small, but it's, state house stuff. Okay, Jean, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for hearing from me. For the record, my name is Jean Murray. I'm an attorney at Vermont Legal Aid. Catch you with my emails that said I'm sorry. This is
You could spend if you're elected, you could spend all night, spend hours here late into the evening trying to catch up on emails. Hopeless.
so this is a complicated bill. There's a lot of things in it that I think really won't work. But I just wanted to point out that and I should probably email Legislative Counsel Dre, there's a typo.
Okay,
Well,
I don't know what the editing
I'm
situation.
sure they haven't been edited yet.
In the mobile home part that you just heard about,
Mhm.
there's a part of this on page 16 that said can't support a judgment of eviction unless the proceeding is commenced not later than 60 days after arraignment. Well, arraignment doesn't have anything to do with eviction, so.
Okay.
It's a,
It's a substantial typo.
yeah, it's the wrong word, and it kind of points out the struggle of this is to try to figure out how to get drugs out of housing.
Right.
And anybody can appreciate that goal, but using and changing the due process in landlord tenant law is not an effective way to get drugs out of housing. The reason is, and I think that you have perceived it as the council was talking, is that what this does is it lets landlords unilaterally get a reduction in time without evidence. In other words, this isn't a complaint verified based on personal knowledge of what's going on. And even if it was, even if a landlord was the person to observe foot traffic in and out of somebody's apartment, for example, I saw foot traffic. Landlords are not generally trained and equipped to be able to interpret those kind of observations as criminal activity. Where's law enforcement? That's where law enforcement needs to be. So,
I would say this, and maybe you can like argue if you disagree, but in my mind, we'd be creating a very different way that the law applies to renters than homeowners, right? I mean, like if you own your home and you're convicted of drug dealing, or but the police come and take you, there's a criminal set of circumstances. But if you lose your housing because of that, it's the question in my mind is like, does the punishment fit the crime before you fit processed at all?
yeah.
If that makes sense.
And so I hate to skip around. I could make a
Yeah.
list of going through the questions you asked as
Right.
council testified. So I don't have very much to say about the first provision, which is in section 14,
The ejection.
the flash site.
Okay.
Other than it puts in, it's
Is the
open,
flash site the ejection as like it's the non-leaseholder part?
yes.
We don't have the bill.
But it's got.
But the language of the bill says that the court on conditions of release could say, stay away from the dwelling if you are not a legal tenant. Okay, but the question of who decides, what is the evidence based on whether you're a legal tenant or not? So, is that the landlord saying, I've never seen that guy? So
Right.
that's just a little bit of a problem with that.
Yeah.
But it should be, sort of straightforward on the contract. But
Not every-
you should know who's the legal tenant and who isn't.
In Vermont law, rental agreements can be oral or written. And so the legal tenant could be there on an oral agreement. And
I mean, I hate to say this, if it's on an oral agreement, it's usually a landlord knowing the person they're leasing it to. I mean, you don't have oral agreements for big apartment buildings.
probably not big apartment.
Yeah, so I mean,
And certainly not in
implies, an
any
oral
subsidized-
agreement implies an intimate knowledge or a modestly intimate knowledge with the lessee and lessor.
Well, one of the things that happens is sometimes, I definitely don't think it's intimate knowledge. I see these all the time. People are there on an agreement. There might have been a lease 5 years ago, and that lease expired.
And they're
it continues. So they're on an oral agreement. They don't have any written lease, and that is a fairly common situation. So it's not always very easy to tell who's a legal tenant or not. But to your point of, isn't there a law that says if you're not there lawfully, yes, there is an unlawful occupant law, and that it says that if you have an oral agreement, that the tenant does need to tell, the landlord, any new people moving in. But if you have a written agreement that prohibits, subleasing, then the person who is subleasing is unlawful. And the law allows that person to be evicted, but it also finds that to be like a violation of the lease. So if you
Right.
allow unlawful a tenant, you can be evicted too.
Mhm.
Landlords are going to decide, not just to get the bad person out, the one that you've heard about. But gee whiz, now I have a tenant who
Yeah.
would let bad people in, I don't want that tenant,
Yeah.
and they will get them out too. So there's actually another law on top of that called that's the most ancient law, which is entry and detainer, which is if you've entered unlawfully without permission,
Mhm.
then you don't need a termination notice or not that I think that more people should try to use that, but it's already on the books. So you asked whether or not in our current law, if there are joint and severally liable leaseholders, can a landlord decide to get one out? Well, I guess they could. But it's really super impractical because tenants have a right to have anybody who they want
Mhm.
visit. So you evict one leaseholder, you get a writ of possession against one, the sheriff comes and escorts them out. There's no writ to get the other person out. The other person says, Mom, come back home, right? So that's that, so there isn't a way other than in the unlawful occupant
Mhm.
law that we already have to evict just one person. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
So, sorry, just before we leave those two laws, is there a reason they didn't go to the unlawful occupants law? Which allows for eviction, is there a reason they didn't sort of hone in on that?
I do not,
Were you not in?
not when we, that I did testify, but I testified based on what the bill was, which doesn't address unlawful occupant, so I don't know why they didn't.
It does, big time, address unlawful occupant,
But not the unlawful occupant statute.
Statute.
but. Right, but, okay, I would have thought they would have used the statute to address the issue that we're trying to address, which is unlawful occupancy. It seems to be absurd that if we have a law, we aren't using it.
That's part of your point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Uh,
I get it,
the idea of,
sorry, I just.
So let me just make sure I understand though, that that ejection flash citation piece is not in landlord tenant statute.
the ejection flash, it's in Title 18, it's not in the landlord tenant statute.
Okay, okay.
And
Even though there's an unlawful occupant section of landlord tenant law.
right, there's two places for unlawful occupant in landlord tenant law.
Okay.
One is in Title 9,
Yeah.
that defines what unlawful occupant is.
Mhm.
One is in Title 12, which talks about the procedure for getting rid of an unlawful occupant.
Okay. Title 9 as well.
And what's Title 12?
Title 12 is generally the procedural title. One of the things about, right now we have Vermont Rules of Civil Procedure, or procedures that the court follows, but originally it was all part of statute. And so Title 12 is often where procedures, court procedures, steps that need to be taken are addressed and all sorts of
It's
things.
not something we often deal with here.
Yeah, for example, the whole foreclosure law is in Title 12. So things that courts need to do are in Title 12.
Well, are you, we do have 3 more minutes. We have to stay on our schedule because Rick has the time constraint, and because it's good practice. Do you have comments on the mobile home park piece, or do you leave that to CBOEO and other organizations?
So no, being evicted from, so there's, if we are thinking about due process to deprive somebody of their home,
Yeah,
those considerations are heightened in mobile home
yes,
parks.
yeah.
Because the person might own the
Mm-hmm.
big
Right.
piece of personal property that they live in, the
Mhm.
mobile home.
Yeah.
but might be subject to being evicted. And that means that they are leaving their home there.
Yeah.
There are some homes that are in parks that cannot be moved.
Exactly.
Right.
And so that they,
Yes.
that's why it's heightened. So right now, the Mobile Home Act allows eviction on two bases. One is non-payment of lot rent,
Mhm.
and the other is violation of a lease.
Mhm.
So one of the things that this would do would be to deem into leases
Mhm.
this language about no criminal activity.
Mhm.
I'd be very surprised if that wasn't already included in lot leases.
Mhm.
It should be. One of the rules about mobile home park lot leases is they all have to be the same. You can't make these terms and conditions with this guy and these terms,
Yeah.
any given park, it all has to be the same. And one would imagine that prohibitions against criminal activity would already be in a lease.
Mhm.
Deeming those things to be in a lease, that doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world.
Mhm.
But shortening the time that puts people out of their home
Mhm.
seems like an incredibly bad idea, especially when it's just on the landlord's say so, on a burden of proof that is more likely than not.
Mhm.
And so what I guess the really frightening thing to me is when we're leaving this up to landlords to determine, gee, I think something's going on there. Aren't we concerned that some landlords might have a suspicion that something is going on there on the basis of race?
I did want to say, we do have a letter that the Office of Racial Equity submitted, raising concerns about this bill as well, highlighting the differentials in who's evicted and who's suspected of criminal activity.
Right.
So,
So, Madam Chair,
yeah.
I would say this subject deserves a lot more time and
Yes.
attention. And I don't want to short shrift Jean and
Yes.
Wendy.
That's
I
absolutely,
think this
yeah.
is a big issue for us and for
Yes.
judiciary. I think we need to chat further about it.
That is. the
And
plan.
I would
Yeah.
propose that it's of all of our, in all of our interests to get this right.
That's why I said at the beginning, this isn't a flyby.
Yeah,
We appreciate that judiciary has not taken a vote and has let us look at this. I will be raising concerns and
Yeah.
will
more to follow.
anticipate, I'm gonna ask that, they hold onto this bill while we discuss more and really narrow the scope of this.
And I think maybe we could even have a joint meeting where we all hear from.
Right.
The intent should be to be plausible.
Yeah,
Yes,
we have
I hear
until
you.
15.
Yes, no, thank you for saying that, Senator Brock.
Yeah.
I want a little more time and maybe to narrow the scope for now. We also have a study on eviction
Landlord
laws.
tenant law,
and,
which we're. as you know
Like
about.
this, some of these pieces need a lot more time or have serious consequences.
Would you mind if I said something about landlord tenant law?
Sure.
So before the pandemic, before this housing crisis got as severe as it is, I would give trainings, Angela and I would give trainings
Right.
together on that the landlord tenant law is a balance of rights and responsibilities, but that balance was based on certain assumptions that landlord's behavior would be guided by market and stability and things like that, and tenants' behavior would be guided by the same things.
Yes.
That has turned upside down.
Interesting.
But I don't think the problem is changing what is really a very good law. Our landlord tenant law is
Mhm.
really a very good law.
Mhm.
So to the extent that people think that it needs to be changed because there are these bad things happening, there are bad things happening that are not being caused by our good, balanced landlord tenant
Yeah.
law.
Mhm.
And messing with that isn't gonna solve the problems. I'm not saying there's not a problem.
Right.
But we're not gonna solve it by changing landlord.
Thank you, Chief. We do need to end, but this is not the end of this discussion, so, we'll be in touch about very much discussion.
The opportunity to come back and talk about it more.
And if you would think about where the discussion of just cause, non-just cause would it fit in with that?
That's a GovOps conversation right now.
Yeah. So we should chat about that.
Yes.
So we
should
now
talk
have
about
both bills, the one we've just discussed and the newest version of age appropriate design code written. Thank you so much, Chief. So we're gonna switch gears and go back to age appropriate design code.
Oh my God, that is like a policy.
Yeah, still your seat happens to some.
Always gentle,
Yes. Is it the same?
Rick has a-
Dan's place.
Yeah, Rick has a time constraint as well, so we're gonna go quickly through his finish. Allison, we can't lose somebody. And we have a time constraint.
Legislation. So this is a piece of
With a-
4% codes come free.
I should be in touch. I have to be here.
The other kind.
Yeah. No, just had to flag that. The charter, get guilty.
Okay.
Just stuff.
Okay.
Good morning,
Okay, AI, here we go.
Rick Sagel, Office of Legislative Counsel. You should have version 1.7 of S289. Oh, a few changes, kids code, just a few changes, nothing major. The committee's, of course, welcome to give you more direction here. If you want to start, the first change is on page 4. And Madam Chair, if you need me to go over anything.
No.
Okay, so on page 4. There was concern on subdivision 13, the online service product or feature. The last version after feature had the word means non-legacy. And there was concern, I added that because I didn't want that phrase that we use throughout the statute to be confusing. I think I made it more confusing by adding the phrase means non-legacy. If you look above at 11 and 12, legacy and non-legacy both means online service product feature. So I think I over confused everybody. So I removed the phrase means non-legacy on 13. And if you want to skip ahead to page 9, there was a request to exempt journalism or websites, services whose primary purpose is journalism. So on subdivision 4, this is under the exclusions. And this subchapter does not apply to for a business whose primary purpose is journalism, as defined in 12 VSA 1650, and I have that pulled up here in a second, and which has a majority of its workforce consisting of individuals engaging in journalism. So,
Is that a standard?
That is the language that the Center for Humane Technology, are you pointing this out in another state or?
this is how we define journalism in
Okay.
Title, this is
Okay.
Title 12, just showing you how we define the word journalism, because I referenced this, cross-reference the statute. Yes, this language was provided by the
Yeah,
Humane Tech.
Great, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
journal, so I mean, we can look at both definitions since we already have an existing definition. But I kind of prefer the one in the bill right now, just in the sense that we're talking about a journalism organization and defining it as having a majority of those in the workforce, on payroll being journalists. And I don't see that here.
So, yeah, and this is totally,
Yeah.
up for debate.
Uh-huh,
The language I got didn't define journalism, didn't
Right,
define
right,
journalists, and we can certainly do that in the
Can we do
statute.
both?
Yes,
Can't we do it all?
right, I wonder if we can use that and then say the majority of their workforce are journalists as defined here.
yes, but if you look above,
Mm-hmm.
the one this highlighted here, what I don't like is in this definition, because we're
Yeah.
talking about witnesses, it
Oh.
says sought to be compelled pursuant to,
Okay, okay.
so it's a complicated definition.
Mhm.
I like the
Right.
journalism definition, but
I do like the journalism definition a little bit more fully than the one we have in front of us on the
Right.
page. But this one on the page does say majority.
Yeah,
So I think we could do a little bit of both. I would just expand it to include
Right.
the stuff below, which talks about what its job is.
I'll just flag that, like, I feel like saying that their primary purpose is to distribute information to the public feels like a concerning loophole for what I would not consider journalism.
Yeah.
Like, I think I wanna say, I know what it's not fake information, or,
But the definition further down that Rick initially identified.
uh-huh,
And this is what I'm cross referencing.
I'm looking at
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I'm looking
So-
at that, and that's what it says.
It says,
News or information to the public.
it says issues or events of public interest for the primary purpose of reporting. Oh, it's hard to read.
I just imagine that this definition
Yeah,
was
there we-
created
very
before we
good.
got really worried about misinformation and
Correct.
disinformation. So I wanna work on this.
Yeah, but it would be great to have this a little bit more expanded.
So what I would suggest, Chair, is that we
Yeah.
actually define our own definition
Yeah,
in the
okay,
statute.
great.
And I suggest we define journalist and journalism.
Yeah.
If
Which
you
I
use that.
actually think is a good idea, and I don't know which committee
Yeah.
ultimately is. If it is a consumer protection issue, but disinformation is going to be one of the biggest issues that concern our democracies
And this could
across
be
the globe for the
beginning.
next however many years,
Yeah.
so,
Here.
we'll have
So-
to,
There must be somewhere that has
Right.
tackled this issue that we can find a better definition.
Right.
to put in here.
Sure.
and I just don't know which other committee we should be talking to about this.
Okay, so that will get some attention. And we scroll quite a bit down to page 18.
Mhm.
So this
Yeah.
is the parental tracking that
Sorry, what page?
page 18, subsection B, line 3. This language was included in the first draft, but it was not worded very well. So it says, and this, by the way, this is, you're under the covered entity prohibition, so these things they cannot do.
Mhm.
So notwithstanding subsection A covered entity that provides an online service, product, or feature reasonably likely to be accessed by children shall not allow a child's parent or guardian to monitor the child's online activity or to track the child's location without providing a conspicuous signal to the child when the child is being monitored or tracked.
This language.
I mean, I'm letting it settle with people because I imagine it's not without controversy. Every time I think about.
It's not, no, controversy.
Right. But every time I think about it, if you have a younger child, I don't think there's the same concept of them being monitored or tracked. You're just trying to make sure they're safe and you know where they are. If you have an older child, the question is, what are their rights to know that their parents are monitoring or tracking them?
You know, and even 20 years ago, when I had young people, I didn't do any of this stuff. This is just appalling to me that parents are able to do this now. I'm sorry, I think it's just outrageous.
But the
that
parents have an absolutely opposite view in
Right,
terms of children, in terms of their responsibility as parents.
right.
The
I think
parent
it's
whose
mixed.
child is buying weapons, for example, and planning to commit an act of violence. The notion of examining the child's online activity as they look through weapons
Absolutely.
manufacturers
Mhm.
and distributors.
It
This is
is
a classic example of that.
Mhm.
And one of the problems I have with this bill overall is the definition of child. You know, where this extends up to age 18. You have people in the Marine Corps who are 18. And
They're
there's
still children, aren't
And
they?
they're still
Well, what
children, but
what
they're
about it
also legal
applying
legal
to,
voters at age 18.
so they're under, this is, Bill defines it as under
Under
18, so
18,
17 and under. So what part of the, well, because
Well,
of
we'll back to that.
which
Let's
is,
deal with this
I-
right now.
I have enough time to address, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
if you could, if the concern here with this specific subsection is, you know, young children.
Mhm.
You know, if you want to allow young children to be monitored. Because I think I have a 7-year-old and this is personal experience.
Right.
We get updates from apps she uses, how much time she's used on this app, and is it learning, is it entertainment?
Right,
So,
but if there was a little thing that said to her, oh, your dad's like paying attention to your little reading
Right.
program. Like I get emails
Right.
if I do reading program with my 10-month-old, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's conspicuous enough.
so we haven't defined conspicuous either.
Okay.
And that's not really a term of art, so it would just be, is it,
Okay,
and what's conspicuous to a 5-year-old, right?
that's what I'm saying
Yeah.
is I feel like at some age, even if it's conspicuous, they're not, like, who knows? So
I have to,
it's conspicuous to a reasonable person, I would imagine.
Right.
So if the child's with mom and dad's tracking the child, then mom knows that dad's on there, which is, I think, important for parents of, you know, who are co-parenting well.
I mean, if you need an app for reading, don't you just read it, or you don't need an app for all that?
I had a computer game to read when I was like 2 years old, so.
I needed no computer games for any of the great stuff we do. I mean, it's just unbelievable to me that we're here as parents. Anyway, as a grandparent,
Books were once upon a time a great innovation, Allison.
They are. books are great, I
The
love
the
them.
last change, the last change is just, on page 21. The equal rights language was added to 2449J,
Mhm.
so nothing substantial there, just.
So we're currently using the same
Encourage.
list of protected classes that is being debated in the Equal Rights Amendment and Judiciary. They are looking at whether or not to add or subtract any of these, so we would try to track that.
What
As
page
well.
again and,
This is page 21, line, starting at line 6.
Rights and freedoms of children. Don't we?
I think it's meant to be a catch-all.
Yeah. It extends the net.
I wanna flag two things. I've spoken with the Attorney General. And she would, prefer that we use the existing enforcement language in Title IX. And again, you know, Rick is using what the national movement has created, which probably goes above and beyond some states' penalties, but our existing penalties actually go up generally above and beyond the enforcement here. It's a higher penalty per incident, which is per child, et cetera. So it would greatly help the Attorney General if we reference existing statute around this, which the data privacy bill does as well. So I haven't heard from the advocates that they're concerned about that change. The other thing we're in discussion about with the Attorney General, and others can weigh in as well, is she just wants to make sure that what we would say in the UK is helpful enough guidance for rulemaking that they can go ahead and go from best interest of the child, don't cause mental anguish, to no infinite scroll, and, you know, no DMing children as an adult after 9 p.m. We may want to make our rulemaking section stronger, or we may want to tighten the direction that the rulemaking takes. So she is engaged in that process and going to share her feedback after she talks to her team over a town meeting break. So that's where we are as far as changes requested and the things we discussed today. Any more questions?
I'm
for
not
Rick?
sure I fully took all that in, but
So, Senator Clarkson, there's language in here for enforcement at the,
yeah, no, I got,
Yeah.
I've got the language. I just am not sure I took everything Keisha just said in.
That's okay. One is a pretty immediate change, which is using our existing enforcement and
Right, I got that.
The other is not clear yet. It is the Attorney General wanting to make sure that all the language in here is enforceable under her practice in US law, as opposed to the UK sort of understanding what is meant by those sections that say you cannot act against a child's best interest and you cannot cause them mental anguish. We may have to do more so that she can enforce it.
Right, which is what the concerns we've heard about the UK law, that it was primarily guidance and not enforceable.
Right, and their rulemaking was very thorough, and is this enough rulemaking for her? Because then we say the Attorney General may adopt rules, and she's asking for more support to adopt rules.
So she's exploring this, and we'll find out Tuesday or Wednesday next week.
The fall.
Fall.
Yeah,
So is this enough?
right. And just to be clear, she has indicated she's likely to come in and express her support for the bill at that time, and we both understand, and I hope others understand, if we don't get it perfectly right, it has a whole other chamber that could work on it, that's been looking at data privacy, so, you know, can help us improve the language, because crossover is,
Yeah, and then finally, by May, we'll hope that they'll be fully aligned. Right. But that-
oh, yes, oh, sorry, yes, that's the rise of the bill, right. fails, yes, so, we will plan on them being fully alive, yes. Thanks, Rick, unless anybody has other questions, and you have to run off.
Thanks for accommodating my schedule.
Absolutely, we
I'm
try.
not gonna follow you on the Ledge Council app.
Oh, there's an app.
Yeah, oh yeah.
As long as there's a conspicuous thing that alerts me that you're following me.
It's a leap year, so we can do almost anything today.
So we have two parent advocates. I don't know if you're coordinated and want to come up together or want to come up separately. I have Kelsey Rude Winchester first.
Kelsey, she's joining.
Oh, okay. I had seen
Oh,
her
great, yeah,
in
yeah.
a meeting and I didn't recognize her. So I was
And you are whom?
I'm Robin Yunker.
Okay.
From Thetford.
okay. And you,
I'm Laura Derringer. I'm just here, logistics support
oh, great. Okay. Great.
with the poster.
The officer and the staff?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
We're very
Great.
impressed.
Okay. So Kelsey, you're with us by Zoom.
She is not here yet. She has a class until 10.
Oh, okay.
Oh my,
Well, why don't we go to you, Robin,
Okay,
and then
sure.
we'll jump back to.
Yeah, I set up the poster so. Is that okay if I put this here?
Yes, yeah. I'm trying to make sure that the camera captured it, I suppose. Well, it's not easy to see, but I don't know how much. Yeah.
people have to come to that.
Julie, so you guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as long as you can point to the upward trajectory. With,
And we can even
Yes.
take it down after I just mention it. I mean, it's so easy to kind of.
Yeah.
read. So.
You know all of us.
No,
I'm one of your senators. I'm Allison Clarkson,
great.
Windsor County District, which includes Thetford and Pittsfield,
Great.
and the majority leader in the Senate.
Wonderful, thank you.
Senator Kate Rumpkin, I chair the committee and I represent Chittenden Southeast.
And I'm Randy Brock. I represent Franklin County and part of Grand Isle County, and I'm the Senate Minority Leader.
Very good. This is excellent. I'm Robin Yecker Boyce. I'm a parent in Thetford, Vermont, but I'm also the pastor of the Thetford Hill Church.
Wonderful.
It's a UCC church.
Yeah.
Progressive organization.
And we should just say we're missing
Oh, yeah.
two of our senators
Okay.
who have,
Someone's
one's in
unwell.
and one is at another meeting.
Yeah.
So
Okay, great. Well,
Economics.
I'm just, first of all, I'm super excited that you guys are so, I feel accessible. And I just want to thank you for that.
You try.
And real and authentic.
It's very accessible.
That's very calming, actually.
Okay.
And so how many minutes do I have?
That's a great question. So we have this subject until 10:45.
Okay,
It's 10:05, so that's 40 minutes and 4 people.
okay.
So about 10
Like
minutes.
8 to 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, you might want to leave a couple minutes for the question. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so what I wanna do is just speak to this graph quickly. This is a graph that shows how in the year, in about 2012 is when you see these spikes in suicide, self-poisoning, major depressive episodes and depressive symptoms. And this is really when we saw the move to cell phones, like ubiquitous cell phones. I know this,
And
right?
the algorithms, but.
Yeah,
Started
exactly.
using
This is
it.
when we see
Yeah.
these behaviors in teens go on. And I just think that that's like a great graph to keep in mind when thinking about these mental health issues that we see in children today began before COVID.
Right.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
kind of
no,
like all I want to say.
absolutely.
And then I think you guys,
Pre-COVID, but it
Yeah.
is cell phone.
And I think somewhere we have
but it's
this
cell phone
chart
um
on our-
use.
We have
And-
this chart of.
So we moved from
very
flip phones into sort of these smartphones.
Well, we flipped from like kids having no phones to
Yeah.
all of a sudden.
Right, so just, I wanted to make a note of that
Yeah.
graph, because it's really helpful
Absolutely.
for like,
What age categories are included in this? You say girls and young women.
we have suicide rates among 12 to 14-year-old girls, self-poisoning among 13 to 15-year-old girls, major depressive episode among 14 to 15-year-old girls, and yeah, 8th grade girls, depressive symptoms.
So can you get this to us electronically?
Yeah,
That would be
absolutely,
great.
100%.
Thank you.
Support team.
Yeah.
Great.
So I wanted to point to the graph. I wanted to just fill in, because I watched the testimonies and I spoke with
someone from the Center for Humane Technology that was helpful, and just fill in some holes about, this bill being more than just social media,
Mhm.
right? And I think you know that, but like, technology is so much more than, when we say tech, and we're talking about these issues using the language tech, it can seem as if we're anti-technology. So it's like, can we be really specific about what we're talking about when we're talking about our concerns for our children? And it really has to do with, it's not like Excel spreadsheets, okay?
Right,
We're
right.
more like worried about
Right.
Excel spreadsheets.
Yes, we
Those
have.
are great. I mean, like, I love that.
Right, we had our tech industry person start with, I represent Etsy, and we were like, oh.
Right, like, what does that
There's a
mean?
huge concern about this
So
bill.
I think when people will argue against sort of the, like, the position against sort of where I'm coming from, they'll wanna frame it as we're anti-tech.
Mhm.
You know, like somehow we're taking tech out of schools, and it's like, no, if anything, we're like creating the space for people to
Healthy
think
tech.
clearly,
Yeah.
ethically, and critically about what technology is, and so for instance, when we've talked a lot about social media harms, but there's, in this bill, we're also talking about video games,
Mhm.
right? And we're talking about Netflix and streaming, like the autoplay streaming, and then we're talking about like all the ways in which each one of these products has strategies for keeping people addicted, right? And so like Snapchat has that continuous, what's that thing called? Like, what does Snapchat do? It's like this continuous
Infinite scroll.
screeching.
Oh,
streak of-
screeching,
streaking.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so each of these products have their own sort of addictive
Yes,
device
Feature,
or code
yeah.
or feature, whatever.
yeah.
So just wanted to make sure that we make sure that when we're talking about tech, the arms around tech, we're talking about more than just social media, and just a little fill in there. And then I think, and then just making sure that we're clear that when someone claims that this bill should have moved forward because it's a First Amendment issue, like, we're really not talking about altering content, we're talking about design. And so it's not a First Amendment issue.
Right.
We're getting it.
Right.
Okay, so you guys.
We got it.
Okay, good. So then honestly, I think like where I wanna go with this is more on how this is like, as a community leader, more as a parent, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
So as a community leader, I want to say that this bill, I really think it's probably going to move forward. I'm very hopeful about it. But it's just the beginning. Like,
Yeah.
we're at base. And what I want to talk about, what came to my mind, like, as I've been thinking about these issues for the last few months, is like how this sort of these personal devices in the hands of young people is eroding human to human connection and human to human.
Yes.
Like when we were, proposing the bill on cell phone free schools, one of the testimonies was from a biophysicist who talked about how this technology is interrupting our natural state, like our natural, not just neurological system, but our nervous system. And so that's why when we go out into nature, we recalibrate, right? Because like you can have like the most stressful day and then you go out, even just looking at that picture, right? And you are calmer. And with these personal devices constantly in the hands of our children, constantly, we have to ask the question, how is this affecting their ability to do what we're doing today, to even like look into people's eyes, to relate to one another? Because I do believe they are having an effect, and I think we can prove that, and I think we have proven that from a scientific perspective, looking at MRIs.
Yeah.
So one of the testimonies in the cell phone free school bill, and this is what I want to say, this bill I love, I think it's going to pass, but it's just the beginning about how we're going to protect the communities in Vermont and how we're going to continue to develop our communities by passing laws that get rid of digital haze.
Mhm.
This is what one of the
Mhm.
testimonies, the dean of students at Harvard Middle School his testimony was so beautiful. He talked about,
Was this in Senate
it
education?
was Senate education, and he said, you know, even if you have like a cell phone in a backpack or
Mhm.
whatever, the fact that it's close to you, there's just this sense that it's around.
Yeah.
And so we need to, I thought about this, I thought about the 1968, when we passed the billboard, like the anti-billboard. And we did that. And we had billboards, just like we have cell phones, we have these personal, but we had them, and we had to roll back.
Yeah.
We had to take them out. And what that did for our state was it when like the tourist industry and like bringing people in, and we were saying, we want you to actually see this natural beauty, right? And I think that there's some type of way in which, as we begin to pass these bills, that we can use that imagery to say, this is why, like, we don't want this big tech to infiltrate so much in our natural environment, both our biological natural environment and our scenic natural environment. And that's how I really believe, like, in the bottom of my heart, that like we have an obligation to get rid of this digital fog.
Mm.
And it's infiltrating into the lives of our adults, into the lives of our children, and they're looking down more than they're looking up. And it's easy for us. We didn't grow up with that. So we can look into each other's eyes and we can have these conversations. But I do believe the community is eroding.
Mhm.
And because of it, and again, I'm not anti-technology, like my kids have cell phones.
We get
like,
it.
You get it, okay, so that, but I feel like that's always gonna come in. Are you a purist? I'm not a purist.
Mhm.
I'm a realist, and I really do believe that this is affecting our communities. And so I guess lastly, what I wanna say about the billboard law is that, that was a policy, right? It wasn't like, and so we not only, we like lived our principles
Yeah,
with that, and that was a difficult
right.
law to pass.
It would be amazing if that was considered limiting free speech now. I think it would.
It was even then.
Yeah,
Right.
but we
right.
fought
Got
it,
it through the Adirondacks too, because it's the,
Interesting.
with the Adirondack.
Yeah,
right, but we did it.
right, right.
And so like that whole like
Yeah.
history gives me so much hope
Yeah.
as to what's possible for us. And why people were attracted to our state is because I think we live by our principles. And our policies reflect that.
Mhm.
And I do think if we did begin to clear the digital fog and the haze that's like interrupting our nervous systems, our children's nervous systems, people would come to our state.
Yeah.
You know, even the tech people.
Right.
It's like a lot
Right.
of the tech gurus, they're not giving this stuff to their kids.
Right, right. Well, thank you
So anyway, that's
Robin.
kind of what and so it's just the beginning. I think we can do more with this
Yes.
imagery and to help bring people in alignment with their values and to, bring back our community.
Thank
So,
You're welcome to stay seated there. Our next witness is on.
okay, great.
And we're gonna turn to Kelsey Root Winchester.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
right. Good to have you.
Good morning. Thank you
Good
for
morning.
having me. So my name is Kelsey Root Winchester.
Kelsey, are you able to turn up your volume? Ours is all the way up. Is it?
Yeah, it's on her end.
Is that better?
Yes, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you all for having me, and I am in support of this kid code bill. I am a mother of a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. I'm also on the school board at Blue Mountain Union School in Wells River, as well as a small business owner, and I'm the coalition coordinator for 302 Cares, which is a substance misuse prevention coalition. As a mother, I am concerned about how and what media my children are consuming and how much they're consuming. It is so easy now for them to just scroll for hours. I worry about what they're seeing and who they're interacting with online, video after video playing on their phones. There are some benefits, of course, to this tech. My daughter's sports team uses Facebook message and Snapchat group messages to coordinate practices and team activities. But without them, she would be missing some of those things. I first allowed my daughter to use Snapchat to stay connected to her cousin, but now she worries about keeping up that snap streak with her cousin. And as a mother, I can't monitor everything that she does all the time. And as a 13-year-old, she wouldn't let me. When my children have been on their screens for an extended period of time, I often notice their moods change. They can become more agitated and more grumpy. My son often asks when he gets home from school to play on his tablet, and I have to remind him to go outside and play, especially on these rare sunny days we have in Vermont. I too have been guilty of just mindlessly scrolling on my phone and suddenly realizing an hour has gone by. And in talking with other mom friends, they're experiencing the exact same thing with their children and often worry about how to keep up with the technology because it moves much faster than any of us parents can. When I put on my school board hat and my substance misuse prevention hat, at our school, we're seeing an increase in behavioral issues. I've been on the school board for 7 years now, and we're definitely seeing a huge increase over those 7 years. So not just even post-COVID, although that, of course, added to the challenges. And then schools, they run into this challenge of they cannot always monitor the use that kids are having outside of the classroom. That's not their jobs. We use one tool is the Youth Risk Behavior Survey for our supervisory union. And some of the trends since 2011 are a bit unsettling. And I can't help but wonder if the digital content is contributing to some of these changes. Students were asked every 2 years if they felt sad or hopeless. And in 2011, that rate was 24%. And in the most recent YRBS, it was in 2021, it was up to 32%. Students were also asked, did something to purposely hurt themselves without wanting to die? In 2011, that was at a 17%. In 2021, it was at 22%. They were asked if they made a suicide plan in the last 12 months. And in 2011, it was 9%. And in 2021, it was 14%. These numbers, to me, are very concerning. At the school, we have seen an increase in behavioral issues, and this need just continues to grow. And I want to keep my kids safe, but technology is just moving faster than I can. So I support this bill to just help curtail some of that, help that mindless scrolling, create an environment that is more safe for them to use. As we know, the brain is not finished developing until they're 25, so they lack some of that impulse control until they're older. And again, I worry about what they're consuming, and really appreciate this bill coming forward to just help keep that safe, because even as an engaged parent, I do my very best, but can't monitor everything. And we all have a tremendous amount. I was watching some of the previous testimony over the last few days, and hearing some of the company's pushback of, putting it onto us parents. We do our very best, but we just can't be there all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hope you heard us push back against the pushback.
I did. Thank you. I was rooting right there with you.
Yeah,
Right.
it was actually it was a robust and exciting, it was actually a great conversation.
And thank you for bringing in the youth behavior survey. That's something we can work to cite so that we look at Vermont data as well. Any questions for Kelsey? Thanks so much, Kelsey. I know you're busy. You're welcome to stay on and listen to the rest of the testimony if you'd like, and we appreciate you being here. I know you came to a information session about the bill as well. So we just, we appreciate the organic focus from parents and community leaders on this bill.
And parents, it's so great
And
to have parents engaging, which we've had every session. That's wonderful, because that's. And actually, it was interesting that all the advocates against the bill were non-parents.
But they chose unwisely, you know, as a new mom, they just chose unwisely to just have three non-parents representing the same group of companies tell us that the solution is for parents to take their kids vote the way I feel like they're gonna eat those words all day if they would like to have kids.
And that parents had to be the gatekeepers.
Right.
Absolutely, trying to convince a teenager that, you know, their parents should be the gatekeeper of all their information and technology. I wish them luck with that endeavor.
Right. Plus, we have 10 teens come in and say, I don't feel good after I use my phone, but I can't stop. That's the definition of addiction.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
I'm hearing more and more teens say to younger kids, don't touch it.
Exactly.
I mean, and that is
Yeah.
real, like my 17-year-old said to my 8-year-old, I don't want you to have this until like college. You
Yeah.
don't need it.
Right.
Absolutely.
We all grew up with that. We're all doing okay.
And their friends were nodding, yeah, and they're not purists, they're just
Yeah.
like, we, this experiment failed.
Right. No, and we are probably you could hear from the next witness about the experience in schools. We had a problem with AOL Instant Messenger, but it was all when you got home, you know, like, and that was bad enough. But to know that the phone is going off while you're in school and the bullying or the fighting, you know, is right there in your backpack or on your desk is, you know,
Yes.
that's a different experience.
And I just wanna say one more thing about
Yeah.
that, like that, yes, in the learning environment, we don't want the cell phone out in the classroom, right? But there's also the human to human connection
Yes.
in the cafes and in the
Right.
hallways, and to give the kids a retreat.
Yeah.
And just say, just for that, it's not gonna be good, I know that's the cell phone free school bill. And, but I can't thank you enough for
Yeah.
listening.
Well,
Absolutely.
And this
Thank
is
you.
just the beginning.
Yes, I appreciate the billboard law imagery because we didn't listen to industry about what we should be bombarded with.
And
Then,
we had to backtrack.
right?
It's not like, cause when I moved to Vermont 25
Yeah.
years ago, I thought we never had billboards, and I was
Yeah.
like, wow, these people actually had them and took
Right.
them down?
Right.
That's a difficult task.
It is.
So
We're used to
kudos.
that. Thank you.
And
Thanks so much.
monitoring. Oh, I was just gonna say, you know, looking at it as younger, my kids are the weird ones because I don't allow them to have cell phones, but as young as grades, you know, first and second grades, the vast majority of kids in my children's classes had cell phones. And especially, you know, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, they do not have that mental capacity to know when to stop.
Right.
It'd be a really big distraction.
Yeah. it's
I've even
frightening.
seen it in adults. I think I own a yoga studio and I'm pretty lucky. I haven't had to deal with, maybe because we don't have great cell coverage in all of Vermont, but I've had some other friends where, you know, people are taking selfies and live streaming in the middle of a yoga class. So sometimes having connectivity is a blessing.
Right. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Kelsey. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Robin.
Thanks so much.
Yes. Dawn.
Hello, Don. Long time no see.
Not always in this committee.
I'm here as a non-parent.
Okay.
Representing many children.
A non-parent, and I was 10 years old when the billboard legislation.
Oh, wow.
It's like.
You are a
Road
baby.
will remember that. But anyway, good morning. So for the record, my name is Don Tinney, 31-year veteran English teacher from South Hero, southern part of Grand Island.
So you have many children.
Yes,
A nurturing.
currently represent nearly 13,000 educators as president of Vermont NEA. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today as you continue to consider S289, a consumer protection bill that will protect the privacy of our students and require internet companies to provide age-appropriate experiences for the children and youth who access online products and services. As you know, Vermont educators prioritize the health and well-being of their students above all else. This is why we have insisted upon students having access to a school nurse in every district, why we support universal school meals, why we are advocating for more affordable housing, and why we are calling for additional mental health services within our school communities. It is no exaggeration to claim that young lives are being ruined by the unhealthy use of social media and other experiences delivered by digital companies over the internet. Cell phones and other digital devices have created overwhelming distractions from student learning. Over the last decade, too many students have become addicted to their cell phones and are suffering the consequences of sleep deprivation, lower academic achievement, and the deterioration of personal relationships. On a daily basis, our educators see the direct result of this deterioration, which has contributed to the very real need for more counselors and social workers in our schools and communities. According to the Pew Research Center, 95% of US teens have access to a smartphone. 46% of teens report that they are online almost constantly. 98% say they are online daily. Cell phone use, including the obsession with social media content, has contributed to student dysregulated behavior. We have learned a great deal about the trauma of adverse childhood experiences in recent years. And every educator in the nation knows the impact that trauma has on a student's social and emotional well-being, as well as on behavior. Too many children and youth are engaged in adverse experiences through their digital devices, as the US Surgeon General has pointed out in a recent advisory. They report the types of use and content children and adolescents are exposed to pose mental health concerns. Children and adolescents who spend more than 3 hours a day on social media face double the risk of mental health problems, including experiencing symptoms of depression and anxiety. This is concerning as a recent survey shows that teenagers spend an average of 3.5 hours a day on social media. And when asked about the impact of social media on their body image, 46% of adolescents aged 13 to 17 said social media makes them feel worse. And I've attached the advisory.
Thank you, you sent it to me.
While some online platforms have benefits, including new ways for educators to present information and for students to take virtual field trips easily, our children and youth are simultaneously suffering the effects of unregulated social media practices and inappropriate content, including invasive data collection, targeted advertising content, misinformation, and harassment. In 2021, 16% of high school students reported that they had been bullied through social media. We also know that considerable research suggests that contents of social media feeds have an impact on teens' self-esteem and mental health. And with ineffective age restrictions found on social media platforms, we know that children and preteens engage in similar online behaviors as these. Digital corporations like Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat have created a monster that has made our culture more and more toxic with each passing year. The Vermont Kids Code legislation will be one small step in taming that monster. Vermont educators take seriously the important role they play in the lives of their students, but they also know that the learning, growth and development, and emotional maturation of their students are influenced tremendously by their experiences outside the classroom. Social media is increasingly part of that broader experience. We need this legislation to support our young people and their families as they learn how to effectively and safely use today's multiple media platforms. While our educators see social media's psychological impact on their students every day, they do not always see the multiple ways in which personal data is collected by every internet user of any age. This legislation will protect the young user's privacy and make sure that our children are not unwittingly providing corporations with sensitive personal data. Vermont educators work hard every day to protect their students from harm. A student's health and well-being will always be an educator's top priority. It is our members' commitment to their students that leads our organization to support the Vermont Kids Code. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
We have been hearing a lot about the companion work in Senate education and this, the fact that at some point we need to give our kids a screen-free space.
Right.
I understand that bill is likely going to an elective piece of legislation where it's guidance for schools that want to go
Model
model policy. Does NEA have a position right now on that bill or?
We certainly believe that every school needs a policy that limits the access to cell phones. It has become a major distraction.
Yeah.
And the problem, and one of the reasons that we support a state model is because it's so difficult for local school administration, educators to take this issue on, where school districts have tried to put in place similar policies. They've received, pushback from parents. And so I think it would be helpful if it were consistent, if it were statewide.
Yeah.
And that's rare that you hear Vermont NEA say,
Yes.
we want
Yes.
more direction from the state.
Right.
But I think in this case, it is beyond an academic issue,
Right.
right? This is a social.
A social issue that is like statewide.
Psychological,
Yeah.
emotional well-being issue that we have to take on. And I think many parents would also appreciate that, like, well,
Right.
I'd like to let you have a cell phone, but the
Yeah.
state of Vermont says I can't.
Yeah. I'd be curious if the pushback is specific to kids with special needs or, parents wanting
But I
to
think
reach their child.
Right, and I think we make exceptions and
Yeah.
accommodations and modifications all the time
Right.
for students, and I think we could do that, but I think what no one could have predicted a decade ago or that this would be such an enormous distraction.
Right.
There were some of us who didn't want to think. I've been accused of getting on Light for years. I'm sort of profit in that in
Yeah.
some respects.
Right.
because-
It's a distraction, and as you say, lives are being ruined. I mean, that's bigger than a distraction.
Well, it's exactly, so there's the academic piece, which is the distraction for sure, but also it is definitely no doubt. It is ruining lives, and we're seeing it in relationships.
It's ruining and
Mhm.
ending some lives.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
absolutely.
it's so profound, its impact, it's so, and you list the many areas it impacts, but I mean, your first sentence, young lives are being ruined, boy, that is so ruined and ended.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Don. You are welcome to stay there. Our last witness on this topic is online,
Oh.
Dr. Jenny Radesky. I hope I said that correctly.
Yes, you did. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Jenny Radesky. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician at the University of Michigan Med School, where I'm an associate professor of pediatrics. So I really appreciate Chair Ram Hinsdale and Vice Chair Clarkson and the rest of the Senate committee for letting me speak today in support of the Vermont Kids Code. So I am an NIH-funded researcher. I study digital media and child social emotional development. I am also chair of the National American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Communications and Media. And so I lead policy development on a national scale for them. But my testimony today reflects my expertise as a researcher, not the views of U of M or the national AAP, although I understand Vermont AAP has endorsed this bill. So my goal today is to talk about my research on persuasive design and engagement prolonging design in digital products used by children and how it impacts them. So I lead a lab here at U of M where we track young children's smartphones and tablets, and we see what they're spending the most time on. And then we download and play those games and take screenshots and try to analyze where the design of these technologies is not matching up with children's unique developmental needs. We focus on design because like a prior speaker said, like tech is not all good, all bad. It's how it's designed that determines whether tech use provides an opportunity versus a risk for children. And children have really different unique developmental qualities at different stages that can contribute to increased risk of manipulation or of harm. And these include immature executive functions where in early childhood and adolescent, there's this burst of frontal lobe development where kids are learning more impulse control, more mental flexibility, more attention control. They're more sensitive to parasocial relationships from their favorite characters, celebrities, influencers, so they are more likely to trust those voices online and follow their instructions. They're really attracted to novelty and rewards. They're really curious, and they should be developmentally. That helps you learn. But that also means that they can be very susceptible to positive reinforcement and feedback. And then they have less abstract reasoning, which means they may not understand what data collection is or what profiling is or targeted advertising. So they may be entering these digital spaces with a child's mindset, but a lot of these spaces were designed with adults in mind and by tech developers who don't have backgrounds in child development. So when we define manipulative design, this is also design that's been called dark patterns. We call this manipulative when it's nudging the user in ways that's meeting the technology developer's best interests at the expense of the user, the child's interest. So here's an example. We published a study in 2022. I'm happy to share it with you, where we examined 133 apps that were played by children in my study. These were all preschool aged kids, so not teens. And this is just to illustrate that this really runs the gamut of ages of kids who are susceptible to these designs. So manipulative design was present in 80% of the apps that we played and studied, and it appeared to meet 3 goals. One was prolonging the time on the app. That was present in 65% of apps. 2, encouraging purchases, which was in 56% of apps. And 3 was encouraging viewing of ads, which was in 32% of apps. So these are all ways. Sorry?
What's the third one?
To watch advertisements.
No, I thought that was the second.
What was the third one?
Oh, so first one was time online. So prolong engagement online. Second was make purchases.
Right. And what was the third?
Watch ads.
Oh.
Which are related but separate because your attention is still valuable.
Yes. Correct. They're always, they monetize a child's experience because all of those can make money for the app developer. And they're all the metrics that are used that app developers monitor on their analytics dashboards to say, is my app successful? How long did a child spend here? How often did they come back? How much money did they spend? So these designs were pretty easy to recognize, and that's why I think they're going to be easy to enforce around that. When a character was making pressure on a child, for example, the character from Miraculous, that app keeps texting and pinging the child to come back and play the app and saying, come back, Paris is in danger, we need your help. There was fabricated time pressure where they kind of put countdown clocks and say, quick, you have to make a decision now, which is going to impair kids' decision making. They use a lot of flashy rewards like gold and dollars and like, sparkly gems and all of these things to get kids coming back every day. And then they use navigation constraints. So that means your only option is to keep playing. It's kind of like infinite scroll, but a little bit different in that you just keep leveling up. I'm happy to submit some screenshots of what these look like just to illustrate how they show up in mobile games and apps.
Dr. Radesky, you're reminding me that like no matter how fine your motor skills are also, it's very hard to click out of the ads as well. Like, so if you're a child or you have shaky hands for some reason, I even have trouble like finding the X, I don't know if that counts as its own feature.
Absolutely. That's a dark pattern because we've been studying ads in kids apps for several years and they keep getting worse. Meaning in this latest study, the ad we called them roadblock ads. They would just show up and take over the whole screen. And then that little X wouldn't appear for a full 20 to 30 seconds. And it used to be that you could just X right out of it, but now they're getting, there's no way out. And then they have this little finger prompt that's like, hey, play this game. So I'll send you screenshots of one game where they, when you swipe, you put a character in a noose and hang them. There's another one where Santa shoots a bunch of people. So they're encouraging playing games that are totally age inappropriate by just having this roadblock of like, you can't do anything else. And if you're a child, you're likely to just be like, oh, the finger told me to swipe that way. So I think that this is unfortunately a design tactic used to make money off of kids' play experiences. They also know that kids who have little fingers sometimes click all over the place and are more likely to download ads or visit the app store, and that also helps them monetize. So it just feels like an exploitative way that design is used during children's play experiences to make money off of them. And I point this out just to say, it's not just social media and the infinite scroll and the likes and the algorithms that contribute to prolonged usage. We're also seeing this in gaming platforms and in other sorts of platforms that kids are using that use all these persuasive approaches. And it's not just the kind of more addictive behavioral reinforcement techniques. It's also these other techniques like pressure from characters that we really need to address through policy. I'll just quickly say what the harms are, right? Because we need to connect this to the harms that kids are experiencing. First is monetary. There was a stat that almost a quarter of parents reported that their child spent more than $50 per month on in-app purchases in smartphone games in 2020. So that's a lot for families who are struggling economically. And when these purchases are so easy to make or are pressured by characters, that's really an unfair practice. And in 2023, the FTC filed a complaint with Epic Games for $245 million because of those sorts of practices. The second is it contributes to longer usage or more compulsive usage. And teens tell us and parents tell us they don't like how that feels. It's correlated with worse sleep, more behavioral problems, more mood symptoms. And third is family conflict. We hear from families all the time that when they use time prolonging apps that are trying to keep their kids engaged, it's so much harder to transition off. And they wind up arguing or their child is more dysregulated afterwards. So I'm just going to close up by saying it's not impossible to remove these design features from kids' products. My research team has interviewed a lot of child-centered designers that don't even think about using these sorts of designs in their products because they just want to make good stuff for kids and engage them because they're telling a good story or they've created a fun game. They're not trying to monetize. Third, I think there's also been, as you know, work in the UK and the EU where they really are trying to shift the way designs are thought about away from adult-centered design and towards more child-centered design that acknowledges kids have different needs. So thank you for listening to me and for considering the Kids Code.
Thanks so much, Dr. Radesky. You've put some language around some of these features that we try to keep up with. So that's so appreciated.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
And we're glad we have somebody who's looking at it nationally.
Yes,
looking at
thank you
all
for
the
that.
commercial policies and looking at
Absolutely.
sort of best practices and any suggestions you have on how to improve our bill, we would appreciate if you have the time to review it.
Yes.
We have another week.
Sure, I'm happy to and work with the folks I know who you've talked to.
Yes. Thank
That's
you.
great.
So I'm gonna move us along and actually get Pat in the witness chair. Even though
I'm gonna ask, we've been sitting here since.
I know, I thought we were taking a break at 11.
And I have to do a break if I'm gonna be able to do this.
Yes.
Can we do at least a 5?
Can we wait? Can we give Pat 5 minutes in the witness chair because he has to leave at 11?
You do?
And then we could push.
Honey, you knew you were top priority.
Oh, great. Okay, so we're gonna take
And then we'll.
for
pick
5
up
minutes
at
and then we'll take a break at 11 till 11:05. We'll take a
Or
break.
11:10.
The
Yeah,
auditor Hopper is coming in at 11, so.
okay, so
Can we
Pat,
just tell Doug to come in at like 11:05?
I did just push him 15 minutes, but I can do that.
Okay,
I think he has a time constraint.
okay,
well, we do too. I mean, our challenges, we all have time.
hi Pat. So I have called you in here because we heard some testimony yesterday that made me want to float an idea before we have the basic needs budget. And I have not had time to give it full thought. I did say it out loud and I think everybody was here, but my basic premise is that Vermont, the state of Vermont should be the first to try and meet our livable wage and our basic needs budget, and we pay home care workers and other workers through our state budget that make nowhere near that. And I would like to ask for a report annually that tracks between the wages that we pay through our state budget and where their hourly wages stand and how far away they are from our, I don't know if we call the basic needs budget calculation, the livable wage, that's
what we call it.
and the livable wage that we use as the specific number. And I can't ask Damien to draft that or anyone to consider that unless you think that's something feasible for JFO to do.
I don't, so Pat did it in Justice office, I don't think I can give you an answer to that.
Okay.
It's the exact
Okay.
second, but I
Yeah.
can certainly think about that, and what is your timeline, I guess?
Well, we were gonna vote this out today. This is a big enough question to me about what actually makes the basic needs budget useful. That we could either vote it out today with that provision and let you answer that in appropriations and live with the answer. Or we could hold on the vote.
If we're gonna add this, I would suggest we maybe
Hold.
hold it
Okay, great.
till Tuesday.
Well, one question is, what do you mean by the state pays? Do you mean the state pays directly, or do you mean the state causes to be paid through
Designated,
agencies such as the designated?
I wanna
That's
include
what you
that.
mean.
I wanna include that, and that is a bigger ask, so.
Yeah,
And I'm not here tomorrow, so I hope we could have the vote the week after town meeting.
so I would propose that we add that with state and designated, all the agents of the state, so that includes that, and that may need,
Needs a little bit.
Damien to identify those
Yes.
agencies.
Yes.
Because it isn't just the designated agencies.
Right.
There are others.
Yeah, so the push about state employees is certainly an easier one, because it's all public record.
Yeah, no,
And it's all unionized.
Yeah, I meant those who get paid
Yeah.
through a state budget.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
Yeah.
to be very broad, you gotta narrow that, because you can be contractors. for
that's
example,
true,
not-
that's true.
I don't think that's your intent.
No.
I'm just looking at the home care workers that a lot of their money comes through.
AHM,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay, so maybe we ought to be more specific.
yes, and I think people hear my intent and my intent not to make it an ending, but
There's
somehow
obviously pass-through
Exactly.
entities that are not as significant, so
Yeah.
it's gonna take some.
that are doing kind of state.
Well, I
Yeah.
think you ought to be, state's attorneys and the assistant state's attorneys are in similar position.
Right.
So, sorry, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So I think you've mentioned this being sort of an annual report,
Yeah.
right? The only hiccup a little bit with comparing it with the basic needs budget is that that's biannual.
Oh, biannual, that is fine.
I would align
Yeah,
it with when we do the
Biannual.
basic needs
Mhm.
budget, which is,
Yes, yeah, that gives you some breathing room too, so.
it's every every other even fall.
You include legislators in this?
Yes, you would.
Yes.
We would be very far away, but, so that makes sense, and we'll try to narrow the scope
Yeah,
more.
the question makes sense. The answer has not been formulated.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so people are okay, including the lead sponsor, with us waiting until the week after crossover to make sure we have that.
That gives me plenty of time to dig.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll let you go. We'll have the same conversation with Damien unless you don't want us to, so he can help us narrow the scope to what
I
we
think
need.
Damien would be a great person.
Okay,
I
great.
think Jamie is first week.